Grace and peace to you from Onalaska First United Methodist Church. You found our sermon podcast. We hope you enjoy.
Our gospel is taken from Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 42. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them to the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the winds and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" A word from God to the people of God.
Thanks be to God. I'm kind of sad because we're wrapping up the summer series. We're wrapping up this book. Have you guys enjoyed this? I feel like we have gotten to know Tish as we've worked through this. It's been 11 weeks. Let's see. What are the things? I wrote them down. We've been following her and kind of along with her. This is what we've done. We woke up and we realized we were beloved before we had done anything to earn it. We wake up beloved. Second thing we did, we made the bed and we invited God into our day, partnering in the work that God is already doing in the world. Next, we brushed our teeth. Remember that one? Brushing your teeth, maintaining the temple of God, marveling at the awe of our bodies. Next, we lost our keys and lost our Jesus for a second. Do you remember that? Right? She lost her keys. And in that moment, we confess our need for Jesus. We need Jesus to save us from ourselves. Next, we ate leftover taco soup. And we thanked God for the miracle of creation and sustenance and the miracle of how stuff even gets to our table. God is working in and through that stuff. Next, we got into a tiff with someone significant in our lives. For her, it was her husband. They got in a fight over their daughter's schooling. For us, we get in little squabbles with the people closest to us. And so in that moment, we recommitted to becoming peacemakers in the world. Next, we checked our email, and we saw how God is at work in every and all vocation and career that there is. God is in every nook and cranny of our lives. There is no place that is separate from our life of faith. So even checking email. Next, we sat in traffic and we learned that there was a divine purpose in waiting. That even in waiting in traffic, God is at work and doing something. Next, we called a friend and we realized that our friendships are small snapshots of what we experience here in this local congregation and what we experience as part of the global church. What it means to be a part of the church. Last week, we enjoyed some pleasures of life. We stopped to drink a cup of hot tea, and we took seriously God's command to savor the good gifts in life. And so we have come to the end of the day. You all know what time it is. I put a cat on the front of the bulletin. You know what it's time for. It's time to go to bed. It's time to sleep. The day is over. How did George Burns end his show? Say goodnight, Gracie. Right? Tish says, this is really interesting, but we talked about this morning in our Sunday school class. She says, good rest takes practice. Good rest takes practice. I know this to be true. Elena, we know, because transitioning from the summer hours to school hours, it's brutal, right? It's brutal. The lazy days of summer give way to the sharp routines. Staying up late is no longer a possibility. We've got to get up early in the morning. The writer of Hebrews affirms this. Mo read this for you earlier. Reminds us that God has always wanted his people to rest. He built it into the week. On the seventh day you ought to rest. He led his people out of Egypt and through the wilderness toward a land of rest. And even now, the writer of Hebrews says there is a rest for God's people that we can experience here and now and into eternity. So rest kind of becomes a metaphor for God's very salvation upon us. In Hebrews 4:11, the writer says, "Therefore let us make every effort to enter into that rest." I always kind of got caught up on that. It's an odd notion, right? That you have to work to rest. You have to practice resting well. Resting. You know, resting, whether we're talking about God's salvation, like in the big scope of things, or whether we're talking about, like last week, stopping to savor the good pleasures of life, which is a rest in itself, or even falling asleep. Resting is a deeply theological activity, or a non-activity. It's a deeply theological activity. Tish points out in this chapter that there are 4 things that sleep kind of reveals to us. Theological concepts about ourselves and about God and our relationship to God. She says, first and foremost, sleep reveals what we love. It reveals what we love. She says this: a decent indicator of what we love is that for which we willingly give up sleep. Right? Kids wake up in the middle of the night after a nightmare, and you get up with them to soothe their fears. Friends come over to play Rummy Cube, and you stay up extra late because you're enjoying the company so much you don't want to go to bed. A friend calls you and says, "I've got to go to the airport in the morning. Can you take me to the airport at 5?" Right? Sleep reveals what you love by what you're willing to give up sleep for. Sometimes we're willing to give up sleep, as I said last week, for just one more episode of your favorite show or one more level on your iPhone app. So thinking through that, based on your sleep habits, what do you love? What are you willing to give up sleep for? Are they worthy loves? Are they rightly ordered? That's the first thing. Number 2, she says, sleep reveals what we trust. I don't know what it is about bedtime, but when you lay down in bed at night, all the worries, all the concerns come into your head in this moment. I've had nights where I just toss and turn. I cannot give up thoughts about loved ones, health concerns, money concerns, children at college. How's this going to work all out? I don't know why that tends to hit us at night. And if we're able to somehow put that aside and embrace good sleep, it means that somehow we are putting our trust in God. That those concerns, those worries, they'll be right there by the bed when we get up in the morning. If we want, we can pick them back up. But for now, let's just leave it right here. Psalm 4, ponder the things that disturb you at night and put your trust in the Lord. Lie down and sleep in peace, for the Lord will keep you safe. Guess what? The world keeps spinning when we go to sleep. It doesn't stop. It keeps on moving along. Staying awake and tossing and turning doesn't help God out in any sense of it. So when you think about your sleep habits, what are some of the things that typically keep you up at night? How can you begin to give those over to God, to experience the rest that God has for you, the sleep that God intends for you? Takes us to observation number 3. Sleep reveals our human limits, right? It's like built into our DNA. Not only did God build it into the laws for the children of Israel, on the seventh day you will rest, but our bodies require sleep. Vivian said it. If you don't sleep, eventually you're going to die. It's necessary. You have to sleep. I don't care how many Red Bulls you drink, Lennon. Eventually you have to sleep. This is an offshoot. This is not in my notes. I remember as a kid watching the movie Body Snatchers. Do you remember that? Right? I don't even know. It was like an alien race or whatever. But once you went to sleep, that's when it was over. And so the heroes in the story were trying everything they could to stay away. And I remember as a kid thinking, that must be horrible. That must be horrible, because I know what it's like whenever you just can't keep your eyes open anymore. Typically, for me as a kid, it happened in church. Right? I know a lot of you get good rest here while I'm preaching. So we'll just turn on some lovely music. And we are limited creatures. We must pause to sleep, just like we have to eat and drink. Sleep is necessary for our survival. And we don't like that very much. We do everything we can to avoid giving up that control. We want to squeeze every last experience we can into the day. And it's true. I was at Valero the other day I was going to get something out of the cooler, and I was shocked to see how many of the coolers were dedicated to energy drinks now. You know, it used to be Cokes and Mountain Dews and stuff. Now it's all Red Bulls and whatever else they make. Just like cooler of energy drinks. We don't want to be tired. We want to stay up and enjoy everything that we can and get everything done that we want to do before we fall asleep. Because sleep, not only can we not continue the activities, but it puts us in a very vulnerable state. I mean, think about this. When you're asleep, you drool. You probably make some weird noises. Right? Our heart rates, our breathing rate, it all slows down. Your brain activity slows down. It's like your body goes into this state of healing that's necessary so that you can continue another day. And stats all over the place tell us that Americans don't get enough sleep. We just don't. We don't. We all stay up too much. So how do you feel about that? How do you feel about being a creature with limited ability? The fact that you have to enter into this vulnerable state of drooling and making noises every single day. You have to stop and sleep. Do you despise that, or do you embrace it? I heard somebody say one time that you are never closer to death than you are when you are asleep. That when you are asleep, you're right on that edge of, everything slowing down in your body. And this kind of brings us to Tish's fourth revelation about sleep, and that is that sleep reminds us of our ultimate limit. We have daily limits, but we also have an ultimate limit. All of us will one day pass away. Ira Glass, radio host, said, "Sleep is a small taste of the big sleep. It reminds us that we are from dust, and to dust we shall return." And we don't like to think about that, which is maybe another reason we avoid sleep unconsciously or subconsciously. Tish reminds us, facing the reality of death teaches us how to live rightly. We learn how to live in light of our limits and the brevity of our lives, knowing that we are going to pass away. What are you going to do with your life? How are you going to make it count? Will you love others well? Will you embrace the times of sleep? We learn to live in the hope of the resurrection. When we embrace sleep as God designed it, we submit to the humiliation of our creatureliness, our fragility. We say, yes, we are, but we also put our lives in the care of the God who created us, the God who sustains us, the God who invites us into that eternal place. The story of Jesus in the boat that Mo read to you, not the one that I read. It is kind of strange, though, to me that we have multiple stories where resting is taking place in a boat. There must have been something about the waves and the sound of the waves lapping up against the boat that was very restful for them. But in this story that Mo read, Jesus and the disciples are in this boat, and there's a storm that is coming up, and it's happening, and Jesus is fast asleep, and the disciples wake him up and say, "Don't you even care that we are about to die here?" And if you look at this story, if you look at this incredible story, and you kind of pair it up with the 4 things that Tish says about sleep, you see it to be true. First, Jesus shows us that he trusts the Father in the mere fact that he can fall asleep in the middle of a storm. His disciples cannot fathom it. How can you be asleep at a time like this? But it shows us where Jesus placed his trust, right? His ultimate trust was in God, that even in the midst of this storm, I'm going to take a rest. And he found a cushion. His head is on a cushion, it tells us. Number 2, it shows us what Jesus loves when he gives up his sleep for his disciples, when he wakes up to soothe their fears and to calm the storm, and then to say to them, "Why are you so afraid?" He's willing to give up sleep for those he loves. Of course, we know that Jesus was fully God, but also fully human. And so Jesus has limits, just like we do. He needed sleep. It didn't matter what was going on. He had to find that cushion and submit to the fragility of a human body and take a rest, go to sleep. And of course, all of this small moment, leading the disciples, loving the disciples, teaching the disciples, it's all moving toward the cross and the sleep that he would willingly experience for 3 days. Right? We can see this in this story. Jesus embraced sleep as a natural and necessary part of life, even with his limited time on earth. He could have fought against that and said, "There is so much that needs to be done. There are so many people I need to touch and heal and be with. There's not enough time for sleep. The cross is coming." But routinely he said, "Let's go somewhere and rest. Let's get away. Let's take a nap." Jesus understood that sleep is part of what God has given us in this life. That God sustains us even in sleep, refuels us, re-energizes us. And he presents for us a model for trust and vulnerability. So as we put summer to bed, essentially, because we're moving into September, because we are transitioning from this summer series into the narrative lectionary, because the kids are back at school now. As we put summer to bed and we move into the fall, let's remember that we can rest easy. That we can take God at his word. When God says, "I want you to rest," to take time to rest, that we shouldn't fight against that. I don't know why we do as children. Mom would say, "Take a nap." I don't want to. Right? We're no different as adults. God says, "Take a rest." I don't want to, God. But we can trust God. She quoted Eugene Peterson in the book. I love this. He said, "When we go to sleep, God goes to work." Isn't that great? It's like God is waiting for us to close our eyes and submit to sleep so he can go to work in us and in the world. So it's important. And when you wake up in the morning, guess what? It starts all over. You find that as you were sleeping, you were perfectly loved, utterly beloved by the Father before you've done anything. As you were drooling and making noises in your bed, God's like, "Gosh, I love that one right there. And then you start your day fresh. New possibilities. New small moments of ordinary activity in which God says, I am in all of it. I am with you through all of it. I am working in and through every piece of it. There is nothing that is separate from our relationship. And this happens day in and day out, and then we come to this place and we worship together. And then we go back to our ordinary lives. But it begins with sleep. As I was telling the Sunday school class this morning, the Jewish day begins with sundown. The first activity of the day is sleep. It begins with a good night's rest. And how well you submit to sleep tonight will affect how the rest of the day unfolds. So I don't have any quick answers for you. I know that we all toss and turn sometimes. But somehow tonight, as you lay in bed, give your concerns to God. Give your worries to God. Put on a sound machine. Put on a fan, whatever you need to do. Drink some warm milk. And give yourself over to the gift of sleep. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.